Thanks for sticking it out today. I know we got a lot of content, but thank you for making your way over here. Next up, we have a great presentation from some folks from Yelp. So just to give you guys a little overview, Taylor has been at Yelp for 5 years building internal development software for the Yelp employees. And Jose has also been kind of leveling up the infrastructure. Today they're going to walk you through some really exciting things and how they've managed to kind of streamline Jira and really make their lives much easier, and hopefully yours too. A few fun facts I like to throw in. So Taylor has a tiny miniature golden doodle, ironically named Moose. And Jose is actually all the way from Peploma, Spain, where he's run with the bulls twice and is happy to say he survived. So just a little fun facts about them. Thanks again for joining, and without further ado, please help me in welcoming Taylor and Jose to the stage.
All right. Everybody hear me okay? Perfect. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all so much for coming. It is just wonderful for us to be here with you today. I'm Taylor, this is Jose, and today you're going to hear the story of how Yelp used a stack of open source tools to solve a problem with our Jira. But we cannot stress enough that we're still keeping you guys awake. We cannot stress enough that you can do anything with the concepts that we're going to be talking to you about today. So at the end of the day, if there is a Jira API endpoint, Ansible can automate it. That's just the flat truth. And we hope today to inspire you to think outside the box and consider some of the problems that you may have in your own instance, and try to identify repetitive tasks that could be automated away and free up your time for more valuable pursuits. So now, first of all, don't worry, your jobs are safe. What we're going to show you is how we were able to reduce the number of global administrators required to run Yelp's Jira instance by 65%. And we did this by empowering our users to perform many of the same tasks that had previously required an administrator. In the process, we managed to remove over 400 workflows, schemes, screens, fields, and more. And the automated processes that we put in place allowed us to standardize our project configurations across the board. This allowed us to carry out a much-needed cleanup effort that let us streamline our Jira instance. And it significantly reduced the number of objects in our instance. And all of this happened while improving the experience for both our users and for our admins. So now, we're going to take you through our story. And we're going to show you how we were able to make our own lives easier. And in the process, we hope to show you how you can make your own lives a little bit easier too. So a little background that's not dog-related. Jose and I have been designing and building internal systems for Yelp for the past 3 years together. And we have done some really cool stuff along the way. And that's why we are so pleased to be here with all of you to share one of our favorite recent improvements to Yelp's infrastructure. You're going to see that email address here again, so don't worry if you don't get a chance to write it down. But that address will get your message directly to Jose and I if you have any questions that can't be answered here, or if it's something you think of later. So now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our team, about Yelp as a whole, and about the growth that led us to the problem and the solution that we're here to talk to you about today. Sorry. All right, so Yelp's corporate engineering department is made up of 32 engineers that handle everything from networks to phone systems to cloud services to internal application development. And corporate engineering, and specifically the application engineering team that we're here representing today, handles the administration of our entire suite of Atlassian products. That's Jira, Confluence, Bitbucket. We even ran HipChat until I'm sure most of you know how that went. But corporate engineering is just a tiny part of Yelp's overall workforce, but it handles some of the most important components that keep us up and running every day. So now, we're going to talk a little bit about Yelp. Yelp was founded in July of 2004 by members of what Silicon Valley affectionately refers to as the PayPal Mafia. It was created as a place for friends to share reviews about businesses, and it's now a publicly traded company with over 5,000 employees spread through 12 offices in 4 countries. And our users have contributed about 150 million reviews, and every once in a while you get one like this that really just makes you smile, so we thought it was a good one to share. And Yelp has grown up quite a bit in that growth to 5,000. And as we moved away from the scrappy startup mentality and towards more defined organizational structures, that meant that we needed more teams, we needed more engineering departments, and we needed a better Jira. So between 2015, when we, application engineering, became involved with Jira, and today, our Jira instance has more than tripled in size. And along with that, the needs of our users have well more than tripled. Jira was originally deployed at Yelp as a replacement for the track ticketing system. And I don't know if any of you have ever used track before, but it was a huge improvement. But at that point, we had over 5 different teams who had some sort of ownership stake in Jira. And that meant that we had admins who were doing things differently, who were doing things in non-standardized ways, and we knew that we had a little bit of a mess on our hands to clean up. We now have, as you can see here, over 1,800 Jira software users and over 1,500 service desk agents, and that's up from the 500 in 2015. So, application engineering took full ownership of Jira in 2017, and we quickly realized that there were too many cooks in the kitchen. Over the years, we had accumulated over 40 Jira global administrators. That meant folks that had full system administration privileges on our instance. And that had resulted in a tangled web of projects, fields, workflows, schemes, and everything else you can imagine. So now, let me ask you guys all a question. Who here is a Jira administrator? Let's see a show of hands. Just about everybody. Now, put that hand back up if you've ever been in a situation where you had an admin, it can be you don't have to say, that didn't realize how much power they had and did something just by accident. No, it's everyone. Then you're going to like this presentation. I'm going to tell you guys a story now. This is John, and very early one morning, John is in our Dublin office. He was attempting to remove a custom field from his Jira project. Now, John was a system administrator, which meant he can do just about anything in Jira. And unfortunately for us, instead of removing that field from the screen for his project, he deleted the field entirely. And that meant it took all of its values with it. And it was very early in the morning for our teams in San Francisco, which is where most of our engineers, including all of, at that point, the application engineering team, was located. But it was nighttime in Dublin, and he was headed out the door to dinner. So unfortunately, that field was used across dozens of projects and contained thousands of unique values. And it was also critical to some of our workflows and some of our automations. So this was obviously a huge problem. There were several other incidents where one of our administrators accidentally deleted, modified, or just moved something that resulted in a larger than intended fallout. And this was largely due to the lack of standardized training across our administrator base. We had highly fragmented levels of experience between these admins, and as we started to take stock of our whole instance and the situation we were dealing with, we knew that we had a fundamental problem. We knew that it was time to reduce the number of Jira Global Administrators, but there was a real concern that the increased burden of management by cutting that number was going to dominate the remaining admins' time. So, of course, Jira was a very important part of our workload, but at the end of the day, it's just one of a large number of responsibilities held by the application engineering team. And we could not spend all of our time managing Jira. So we knew that we had to work smarter and not harder. And now, I'm going to tell you guys about some of the problems at a high level that we were dealing with, and some of the solutions that we looked at to solve them. So, let's talk about the first problem. There were too many admins. That's going to be a theme you hear throughout this presentation because it is not a gimmick, it's not a buzzword, it was our legitimate issue. And admin rights had been granted to folks from all sorts of teams and all sorts of time zones to try to spread the burden of the administrative load. We wanted to be able to ensure that we were giving the best possible service to our users, but we also wanted to make sure that we were doing it in a way that matched the standards for both our department and the company as a whole. We realized that automation could solve some of our problems here, like it has with many of our other systems. So the first problem here was that there were too many pain points for our admins. There were high administrative overhead for very simple tasks, and that meant that lots of small issues were coming up, piling up, and they were dominating our workflow. We had too many users with powerful access rights. Because we wanted to spread that burden, that meant that we had been granting these global administrator permissions to all sorts of users. And because users had to create a ticket and wait for an admin to create a project or make a small change, they were generally going to the person that they were the most familiar with, or they had the closest relationship with, because that meant it would get done fastest. Now, the problem there is we were delivering a very inconsistent experience. The results that you got essentially depended on the administrator that you were working with. And some of those admins were very familiar with Jira and our best practices, but some were just senior engineers that didn't have any real training in Jira at all. This began to lead to our second problem, which was the pain points that developed with the Jira system itself. We had a ton of variance in our project structure, and that was because those 40 admins were doing things based on their own preferences rather than strict fixed guidelines. Old projects that were no longer in use just basically lay dormant because no one really knew our archive process and it wasn't well utilized. And that meant that performance issues started to crop up because we had an extremely high number of objects, including thousands and thousands of custom fields. And all of this added up to one thing: poor user experience. We still had one more concern too, and that was security. With so many global administrators, there is an inherently higher risk of compromise. People and passwords are like oil and water. They're eventually going to find their way apart. And if you've got users with serious system administration rights, you have more attack vectors on your instance. Beyond our Jira audit logs, we had very little to inform us about potentially dangerous changes that were occurring. And we were operating reactively. We were responding to the Dublin issue. We didn't know about it in advance. We knew that we needed to be proactive. We had administrators that were deleting fields, issues, projects, all sorts of things. And we often wouldn't know until someone had complained because they may not have realized that they did it. By then, it may be too late for a simple fix. You can't roll back a database snapshot if it's 10 hours later. So we knew we had a problem, but we knew that our team was up to the task. We came into this project knowing what we wanted for our solution without even knowing what that solution was. And that meant Yelp standards. That meant code and manifest driven using something like Puppet or Ansible, as we use to manage many of our other systems. So with a better understanding of what our pain points were, I want to talk now about where we started to look for our solutions. This was huge. We realized that the increased project admin permissions in Jira 7.3, the ability to modify workflows, to add fields, would allow us to empower some of our regular users to perform the changes that previously had required an administrator. In addition, Jira's Create Project from Template API endpoint allowed us to create new projects from a suite of heavily customized project templates that we created to meet our users' needs, which allowed us variety while still maintaining tight standardization that we had lacked before. Project creation was essentially the most common task for our admins. Yelp has over 375 projects right now, and most of those were created within the last few years as our teams became more defined and we required new spaces for folks to track their work. And because our project specification was so heavily customized, every time we wanted to create a new project, that meant individually adjusting every single scheme and permission And that required a lot of admin time and a lot of manual settings. Now, because we were able to perform every step of our Jira project lifecycle via Jira's API, we were able to perform these tasks using Ansible without any human intervention. And I'm sure a lot of you admins know, when you remove people from the problem, things get better. We also automatically set project leads and administrators, and we run scheduled jobs that ensure every single one of our Jira projects has an active lead and an active project admin to be able to manage their minor requests. So now that we've gotten a chance to look at these concepts at more of a high level, I'm going to turn things over to Jose. And he's going to tell you in a little bit more depth about the actual technologies that we use to accomplish our lofty goals. Jose?
Thank you, Taylor. And now I'm going to talk about all the different technologies involved by walking you through a real-world example. This is Julia, and she is an engineering manager at Yelp. Julia is working on a new feature for Yelp.com, so she decided to create a new Jira project to handle the life cycle of this new feature. She wants to call this project Summit and make it accessible to only Yelp engineering teams. As an engineering manager, in addition to a Jira project, she also wants to have a visual overview of all active tasks and is progressing through the workflow, so she decided to create a Kanban board along with the project. We store all of our Jira projects configuration in a Git repository. Each Jira project is represented as a YAML file. If we want to create a new Jira project, we just need to add the YAML file, a new YAML file to this Git repository. So in Julia's case, the first thing that she will need to do is clone this Git repository, then run a Python script that asks a few basic questions about her project settings. This Python script will create a perfectly formatted YAML file based on her answers. And all Julia has to do is upload this YAML file to the Git repository, and her project will get created by Ansible. This is how the YAML file looks. As you can see, it's really easy to read and understand. When Julia pushes the YAML file to the Git repository, there is a few things that happen. Jenkins and Ansible will detect that there is a new YAML file and validate it to make sure it makes sense and follows Yelp standards. A lot of people ask me, if you have a Python script that creates a perfectly formatted YAML file, why do you even need to validate if the YAML file that is being pushed to the repo makes sense and follows Yelp standards? Well, let me tell you a real story. One day, one of our Yelp engineers decided not to use this Python script to create the YAML file, and he created manually. For the description of the project, he used emojis. As you can probably guess, this doesn't follow Yelp standards. So yes, we need to validate every single YAML file that is being pushed to the repo. Jenkins then stages the changes, and finally, using the Jira REST API, it deploys the changes and creates the Jira project. Once the project has been created, Ansible will append the tag project created equals true to the YAML file. So upon the next run, Ansible doesn't try to create the same project again. Julia will get a notification that looks exactly like this to let her know that her project has been created and that it's ready to use. We also add a link to our Confluence page where we explain the best practices for our Jira project admins. This is a real email, by the way. So while there is a lot of things happening on the back end, for Julia, creating a new Jira project is super simple. Now, let's say that 6 months down the road, the project is completed and Julia wants to archive the project. All Julia needs to do is append the tag archive equals true to the YAML file. And once she has done that, Ansible will validate that there are no open tickets within the project. It will update the project name, category, and schemas. And finally, it will send an email to Julia to let her know that her project has been archived. As you can see, archiving a project is even easier than creating it. The reason this process appears so seamless to Julia is because we're using a whole suite of technologies on the back end. Now I'm going to be talking about all those technologies. This is a list of all the technologies: Ansible, Git, Review Board, Jenkins, and pre-commit. And the reason why we're using these tools is because they are open source and free, but most importantly, they have been available for a long time, which means that there is a lot of information and resources online. Obviously, that makes our lives as Jira admins and developers much easier. So now, let's talk about each technology. The most important tool, as I said, is Ansible. Ansible is in charge of interacting with Jira's REST API. Ansible is a powerful and simple automation engine that handles the configuration management, provisioning, deployment, and service orchestration. It is also agentless, which means that you don't need a complex infrastructure to run it, like Puppet. And also, it uses simple YAML files for each configuration. Git was an obvious choice for us because of the built-in revision history. With Git, we can easily identify changes and answer questions like who did what, when, and where. Also, Git protects the integrity of our Jira instance because we can easily roll back changes if there is an unexpected issue. There are a lot of continuous integration platforms, like, for example, Atlassian Bamboo, which provides support for Ansible. We use Jenkins just because it was the existing continuous integration platform at Yelp. Jenkins is in charge of running Ansible, Git, and pre-commit. We also use pre-commit hooks. These tools ensure that the formatting of each YAML file is correct. Every time one of our engineers performs a Git commit to either create, update, or archive a Jira project, pre-commit hooks run a set of tests against the YAML file to validate that that makes sense and follows Yelp standards. At the end of the day, the only thing that these tools are doing is interacting with Jira's REST API. Without it, we couldn't make this happen. The Jira Server API has multiple endpoints, but for this project, we have used specifically 2 of them. The first one is the project endpoints. We use this endpoint to retrieve or update the configuration of existing projects. And the second API endpoint, and probably the most important one, is the project templates. With this, we can create an exact copy of a perfectly configured Jira project that has already been set up in our Jira instance. So in Julia's case, when she tries to create a new project, Ansible will use this endpoint to clone one of our Jira project templates and update a few attributes like the key, the description, and schemas. By using all these technologies, we were able to increase the security of our Jira instance. We now have rich login, and we're able to answer questions like who did what, when, and where. Also, since we're now ingesting all of our Jira logs into Splunk, we have alerts and dashboards that show us the performance of our Jira instance, including alerts if there is any unexpected issues. In addition, since we just use a single account to create, update, or archive Jira projects, we were able to minimize the risk of exposure as we have less Jira superadmins. As you know, the less people who have keys to your kingdom, the more secure you can keep it. And that's it. And now I'm going to show you a quick demo of how this tool works in real life.
Hi, Atlassian Summit. I'm Tara, and I'm here to show you how easy it is for engineers like me to create our own Jira projects using Ansible. First, what we're going to do is clone the repository. You'll only need to do this the first time you want to create a project. Next, I'm going to use the Quick Start script to create my project file. It's just a few simple questions and you'll be on your way. But what if I wanted to use an invalid project name, like Tara's cool project? As you can see, the script ensures that only valid project files are created. Now we'll enter a valid name and be on our way. The resulting change is very simple. Now, I'm going to commit our changes and put it up for review. This step ensures that one of our Jira engineering team members are able to give it one final check before it goes to Ansible, but this may not be needed depending on your configuration. You can see here that as soon as I commit a change, a whole suite of tests called pre-commit hooks run automatically to ensure that what I've committed meets all the requirements for a new project file. Now that I've got my ship it, I'm going to merge my changes. We've made it super simple to merge changes correctly by including a script that will automatically perform the get steps for you. We'll see our project build here, and once it's done, I'll get an email. Here it is. Looks great. Now let's have a look at our new project. Look at that. Our permissions, schemes, and all other configurations are automatically applied and my desired board configuration is ready to go. So there we have it. Now that you've seen how easy it is for Yelpers to create Jira projects, maybe you've thought of something in your own environment that could be automated with Ansible. Thanks for listening and have a great day.
So now that you have seen how it works and how simple the process really is, I'm going to hand it off to Taylor and he's going to talk about the benefits and value.
Thank you, Jose. So now that you've all had a chance to see what this actually looks like, I'd like to bring us back around and talk a little bit about the benefits and the value that we found along the way. So the first thing is a huge one. Our tight standardization allowed us to significantly consolidate our instance, which led to better performance and better indexing times. Even though we had fewer administrators, we were meeting our users' needs while providing better security and faster turnarounds. And all of this led to happier users. We really do believe that by giving our users control of the whole project lifecycle and its administration, they feel a sense of ownership, and they're more likely to try to solve their own problems and learn more about Jira in the process. So, you guys have already seen this stat, but we feel that it is so important that it deserved a second slide. 65%. We cut our admin pool from 40 admins to under 15, and that was a huge, huge improvement for us. A year ago, our users were requesting new projects by creating a ticket, waiting for an admin for as much as a week, and then coming back to the admin team for any change they needed, no matter how small. Now, projects are created instantly, and correctly every time. Users are automatically granted project admin rights, and they're automatically provided with the documentation that they need to effectively manage their new Jira project. I think this really speaks for itself. By cutting down on the clutter of our Jira instance, everybody wins. And with our push to enforce stricter governance, we took the opportunity to update all of our existing projects to match our new standards. And as a result, we were able to remove the incredible amount of clutter that you see here. So now, we're going to tell you about some of the lessons that we learned along the way. There is beauty in advertising. And I know that might not mean anything to you right now, but users need to know that they have a new power. We found that until we started actively advertising the Ansible service, users were not finding their way to it, and they were still cutting tickets for an admin to create their project. It wasn't until we began actively promoting it and proactively sharing that documentation that usage caught on. And once it did, it caught on quickly. You need to remember, it's 2019, and an email barely counts as getting the word out. You need to create Confluence pages and evangelize your docs. You need to share what you've created in stand-ups, in status updates, and any other way that your organization shares information. Documentation was key for us here. A big part of our success was because we were able to empower our project admins to carry some of that burden by automatically providing thorough documentation upon the creation of their project. This way, they actually know what they need to effectively use their new tools. So this is an example of just one of the many documents that we've created, and it's too big to even fit in one screenshot. But we try to outline all of our processes and preemptively answer questions so that our users can get what they need without having to dig for it. Lastly, we learned that we need to trust our users. To me, handing off new abilities to your user base is a lot like sending off a child to college. You know that it's probably not going to go how you expect it, but if you've built a strong foundation, you need to trust them and you need to let them make their mistakes. So, we want to end this by reiterating what we believe is the single most important point that you can take away from our presentation today. We're not here to tell you that automating the creation of projects is going to be the solution to whatever your administrative woes are. We're here to showcase the technology that made that possible for Yelp and hopefully inspire you to think about any challenges that you face within your own instance. By leveraging Jira's API and free open source tools, you have the ability to automate just about any manual task, and you can let your users self-serve safely. So now it's up to you, and we can't wait to hear what you come up with. So Jose and I will now take your questions until the end of the session, and if you don't get a chance to ask a question, or you've got something that might require a little bit more nuance or depth, we invite you to write down this email address, take a picture of it, and send us a message. It's just a Google group that goes to the two of us, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So with that, we'd love to take any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'll just be running around with the mic here. We will start right there.
Hello, thanks for the presentation. Have you considered adding maybe a Jira Service Desk on top? So instead of using YAML file, your users could use Jira Service Desk for asking for a new project?
We hadn't until now, but I think we've got a good idea on our hands. That's great.
Other questions?
Yes, do you maintain the configurations for all your projects and verify them as you go along, or is it a one-time shot?
We do. So the repository is it's constantly being added to, and it's basically state dependent. So when a change occurs within those files, that's going to push it to our continuous integration platform, and it'll deploy whatever the change that was made is. So we have 375 YAML files in the project directory.
Thank you. It was a great presentation. Just one question. Why did you decide on Ansible? Like, why not just call the REST API with a Python script or stuff like that? What is the benefit of using Ansible for that?
That's a good question. We have a lot of Python developers at Yelp, but not everybody is a Python developer. So Ansible uses YAML files for each configuration, and it's extremely easy to read those YAML files. So if any Jira admin want to understand what Ansible is doing, it's really easy to just look at those YAML files and understand, and even make changes to those YAML files. So that was one of the main reasons why we decided to use Ansible versus building our own Python scripts interacting with Jira's REST API.
All right, we have time for one or two more questions.
Have you considered using Ansible to do any of the more back-end work, like reindexing?
Not specifically reindexing, but there are a few things that we're looking at right now. One of which is we run our Jira directory out of Active Directory, but we maintain the Jira internal directory for service accounts and things that we're not creating matching Active Directory objects for. And something that's a really common request is to create a team alias, basically a read-only service account that can be tagged, that'll go to a Google group that goes to your team or whatever it is. And so we felt that this might be the perfect way to deploy those in a similar manner, basically automatically creating them once the change has been detected and letting those folks self-serve those accounts because they don't need passwords and they'll never be logged into. Thank you.
I'm very curious, since you took your old environment, you actually consolidated to a manageable set of configuration, schemas, and so on and so forth. I was wondering, how did you achieve that? Did you guys, kind of sit down at your company and said, this is the common project configuration that we can define for your users, or that you guys have, I will assume, I'm just very curious, how do you guys automate that process, basically identify the, let's say, removing the custom field that is no longer needed?
So you might not believe it from the stats that we showed up there, but we actually did have a completely defined project specification that admins were supposed to be creating that entire time. It just was not widely used. And so what we've actually done is we have two distinct configurations for teams that prefer Kanban versus Agile. And those are the options that you can self-serve out of Ansible. It did predate Ansible, but once we had the strict governance in place and we realized that there wouldn't be more exceptions getting added onto that pile, that was when our team took the opportunity to sit down and go back and retroactively try to true up some of the more significant outlier projects. As far as the custom fields, basically we looked for repetition. We had a number of fields that literally had the same name and were being used for essentially the same thing. We basically took the opportunity and the momentum that we had and decided to go ahead and do one big cleanup.
All right, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. You can feel free to find Taylor and Jose just outside. Again, please remember to actually just review the session in the app. We'd love to have your feedback so we can plan future sessions. Thanks again for coming and enjoy the rest of the summit.